Part 40. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 391. The red-haired lord of eternal night stood in the sky, with black flames wrapped around his body. Under the evil appearance, a pair of blood-red pupils had Megatama turning. The powerful fluctuations released by the pupil technique swept across the battlefield, making people fall into it unconsciously. In the dark void behind the red-haired man, there was a huge shadow with blood eyes, covering the sky and the moon, overlooking all living beings. In the boundless land below that turned into a wasteland, countless creatures transformed from shadow monsters knelt in the direction of the Lord of Eternal Night. Their eyes are pious and their expressions are sincere, like the craziest pilgrims. These creatures whose souls have been injected with new life have different shapes and appearances. Some have the same body shape and appearance as humans, and even the skin texture is like that of a newborn child. The men are strong and the women are charming. Among them was a black figure with a half-orc-like appearance on his head. He was huge and had an astonishing momentum. Some are simply alien beasts with ferocious looks, but their eyes show a clear mind that is different from the monsters. Although these creatures created by eye skills and soul sources are of different sizes and ages. But the biggest thing in common is the dull skin and a pair of blood-red pupils. These are the people who belong exclusively to the Yonjai dynasty. The royal family of Eternal Night. What's going on with these monsters? And there are countless human coalition forces below, and even survivors in front of the screen thousands of miles away. When I saw the shadow monsters gradually taking form, the expression on my face was no longer enough to describe as shocking. It's fear. An unspeakable fear. They vaguely felt that this newly born population might be more terrifying than zombies. Countless shadow monsters transformed into entities, and then began to emit indistinct roars and long groans from their mouths. For a time, all kinds of roars and roars like beasts emerging from their cages echoed on the battlefield, like a group of demons dancing wildly. How is it possible, that Corpse King, he created a race? Thousands of miles away in the command room of the base, Zhou Xiang looked at the scene of all the souls worshipping in the picture with trembling eyes. His eyes were bloodshot and his expression was extremely shocking. And the next second, the evil man who looked like a god hanging high in the sky waved his hand and said with a hearty smile, "Belonging to Yonjai, open your fangs and fight back from now on. Here we go." As the Lord of Eternal Night finished speaking, a pair of red pupils on the earth flashed with bloodthirsty color, and they turned to look at the human coalition not far away. For some reason, the bodies of many coalition forces began to tremble involuntarily when they were stared at by these newborn monsters. The next moment, countless Yonjai tribesmen swayed and attacked the surrounding human coalition forces. The black wave spread across the plains, covering and swallowing the coalition forces composed of tens of thousands of humans in an instant. How many are these creatures born from the shadows? Perhaps Mu Qiu himself didn't know that he had injected all the 100,000 soul essences that Zilan Base had absorbed over the years into the body of the black shadow monster. In an instant, like thousands of beasts galloping, the entire Jade Sea base was occupied by black figures in the dark night. The eyes of countless human coalition forces were filled with terrifying fear, and they were swallowed up in the ocean of black shadow. A human coalition swung a knife towards a Yonjai tribesman, and dark blood suddenly flowed from the latter's chest. Black blood. The pupils of the human coalition trembled. Before he could recover, the Yonjai tribesman who had a steel knife inserted into his chest and abdomen in front of him actually grinned. The red pupils flashed with blood, and a pair of sharp claws penetrated directly through the heart of the coalition army. The human coalition soldier's heart spurted out a large amount of blood, and his eyes were full of fear and unwillingness, and he fell to the ground and died. The Yonjai tribesman who killed the coalition force slowly pulled out the steel knife that was deep in his chest, stretched out the scarlet long knife and licked the blood on it. What's even more incredible is that the bone-deep wounds on his chest are healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Holding the blood-stained steel knife in his hand, the Yonjai tribesman showed an evil smile on his face, turned around and launched a new round of killing towards the other human coalition forces in the battlefield. At the same time, similar battle situations abound in every corner of the battlefield. These Eternal Night Royals have different strengths. Most of them are just C-level awakeners with mediocre strength, and some have reached A-level and B-level strength. The powerful existence among them has even reached the S-level level. Different from the previous fierce battles, this time the battle was almost one-sided suppression. The smell of blood permeated the battlefield, but it also inspired the Yonjai clan's ferocity even more. Killing and evil, this is the nature given to the royal family of Yonjai since their birth. There are Yonjai tribesmen everywhere on the battlefields of Jade Sea, and the situation of the war is completely reversed. The painful wails and desperate pleas for mercy of the human coalition forces turned into the nourishment for the Yonjai people to wake up. To the east of the Jade Sea, a sky-high giant condensed with quicksand rose from the ground, crushing countless awakened people from the coalition. To the west of the Jade Sea, the shadow of a holy angel holds twin flowers in his hands. Thorny vines spread across the entire street, and gorgeous blood-colored roses bloom on the thorns. Outside the wall, a beam of white light flashed one after another in mid-air, causing ripples in the space. A tall blue mecha light cannon roared in the air, and a large part of the human coalition was annihilated under the destructive artillery fire. In the ruins of the collapsed city, a figure wrapped in bandages staggered to his feet. Under his feet were countless limbs, and the bright red blood soaked the white bandages. On the top of Yuhei Mountain, Yefanyan witnessed this shocking battle with her own eyes. Her delicate body began to tremble involuntarily, and her clear eyes were filled with complex colors. Her eyes swept through several fierce battlefields one by one, and the energy fluctuations emitted were palpitating. So similar. The fragments of memory in her mind came like snowflakes, making her recall too many memories. Everything was so similar to the time and space before she crossed over. Subconsciously, he took a half step back, looking at the figures galloping on the battlefield, with a look of horror in his eyes, and he murmured with his cherry lips slightly parted. Born in redemption, rising in dawn, according to legend, after the four domains of the Eternal Night dynasty became the supreme, the Lord of the Eternal Night divided the world into 12 realms and sent 12 subordinates to guard the 8 wasteland realms. They are the chief owl kings who guard the myriad races, the masters of the realms under one person, and the world calls them the 12 night owls. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 392. As the clarion call for the Eternal Night Dynasty's counterattack sounded, tens of thousands of human coalition forces were instantly submerged in the turbulent waves by the night. At first, it was just some ordinary soldiers who were killed. But as the number of Eternal Night monsters continues to increase, the awakened ones in the coalition army are also dying at the hands of these bloodthirsty Eternal Night tribesmen. The commanders from the major human bases couldn't help but feel sad when they saw this scene. These awakened human beings are all precious cornerstones for the rejuvenation of the human race. In just a few moments, nearly half of the human coalition forces were dead, and even a few destruction-level experts were trapped in the siege of countless Yonjai tribesmen. In the center of the collapsed ruins, Wang Heng waved the ancient spear in his hand and stabbed it out, and the dozens of black figures that came to attack were instantly pierced. Black blood spurted out, and the golden light on the holy spear seemed to have a natural restraint on these dark creatures. Wang Heng was so fast that he almost walked through the piles of corpses at his feet. After rescuing the surrounding coalition forces that were under siege, Wang Heng stopped and looked up suddenly as if feeling something. Above the sky, the red-haired man's eyes were blood red, and the Megatama in his eyes was spinning. There was a steady stream of blood souls pouring into the black shadow below him in the surrounding void. Starry eyes flickered, Wang Hong yelled. Deal with the Lord of Eternal Night first. Only by killing the Lord of Eternal Night can the birth of these shadow monsters end. With a loud roar, Wang Hong killed the Yanjai tribesmen who were surging around him. In an instant, he soared into the sky and combined with the ancient spear in his hand, turned into a bunch of golden shooting stars in the sky, dazzling. The golden meteor contained the killing power of the holy spear, breaking through layers of space and bombarding in the direction of the Lord of Eternal Night. Feeling the strong fluctuations coming from her side, Mu-Chiu's evil eyes flashed. The giant skeleton with black flames behind him rose from the ground and collided head-on with the golden meteor that was blasting away. In an instant, extremely terrifying energy fluctuations overflowed, and countless humans and Yanjai tribesmen all around the land were turned into ashes. With the huge figure of the Susanoo Titan hovering behind him, Mu-Chiu looked at Wang Hong with a smile in his eyes. I said before, only strength is the only law to measure all things. Suddenly there was a howling wind behind him, and the Susanoo giant's fist wrapped in black flames suddenly blasted out. A blood-armored giant tens of meters tall was blasted out, instantly smashing down a tall building. Feeling the increasingly turbulent black flames, Wang Hong's eyes showed a look of determination. Accept the destiny of heaven and kill all evils. At this moment, the bandage wrapped around the tip of the gun suddenly fell apart. Along with it, a shadow of a ferocious beast emerged from the golden spear tip. It was a ferocious giant lion whose whole body was covered with dazzling golden light. It let out a thunderous roar and warded off all evil. Wang Hong held the holy spear and stabbed the Susanoo giant, but the golden lion attached to the holy spear roared and rushed towards Mu-Chiu's body. Oh! Divine beast bloodline! In the body of that giant lion, Mu-Chiu could feel a trace of the blood of the ancient beast similar to the candle dragon. Roar! Just when the giant golden lion was about to open its bloody mouth and devour Mu-Chiu, a giant flaming dragon more than 10 feet long jumped out from behind Mu-Chiu and collided with the giant golden lion. The flaming waves surged into the sky, instantly knocking Wang Hong away, and the giant golden lion was dimmed under the boiling flames. Under the gazes of hundreds of thousands of people, Mu-Chiu, wearing a candle dragon armor, walked through the air. The blood moon behind him cracked open, like a blood-colored pupil that suddenly opened. Under the gaze of everyone, a palm-sized bloody rough stone suddenly appeared in front of Mu-Chiu. That's... The nightmare in the dark looked up and felt the strong breath of life from the original stone. This is the broken world tree seed obtained from the secret realm. After being tempered by Mu-Chiu using black flames and blood souls. The originally rounded rough stone had edges and corners like crystal nuclei. The color has also changed from the dark green full of life to the blood red today. The next second, blood circles surrounded his eyes, and red flames rose up. The blood-colored raw stone crystal core expanded in the boiling flames, and the gradually elongated crystal core vaguely showed the outline of a long sword in the flames. At the moment when the original stone turned into the seeds of the world tree was burned by the flames. Black energy surged around Mu-Chiu's body, flames rose, and all the devouring power of the chaotic form in his body was released. The countless newly born Yanjai royal family on the ground seemed to have sensed something. They stopped their bloodthirsty killings and knelt down to worship Mu-Chiu in the sky. An invisible force within the body was pulled by the force of devouring, gathering from all directions into the crystal core melted by the flames. And as this invisible force merges in, the outline of the long sword transformed by the crystal core becomes clearer. What is he doing? Through the light curtain, countless human beings looked at the figure of the Lord of Eternal Night with dumbfounded eyes. The karma fire in front of him was burning, and the flowing fire overflowed in the night sky. Under the illumination of the flames, his handsome face was deeply engraved in everyone's eyes. Only the nightmare hiding in the dark noticed it. His expression became extremely solemn, and his eyes jumped. It is already a taboo to use the origin of the soul to replace the creation of heaven. Now it is pulling the fate of a family into one, and there is that weird energy crystal core. Lord of the eternal night, what do you want to do? Nightmare stared at the red-haired figure in the air. As the raw stone in front of Muchu was constantly being sacrificed, the chaotic sky was like thunder. All the creatures who heard the thunder trembled in their hearts, and looked up at the sky with palpitations, as if they had violated some taboo. And Muchu's eyes were directly cracked with blood lines, but the corners of his mouth gradually rose, grinning wildly, and a crazy look flashed in his eyes. At this moment, Muchu suddenly raised his hand, and the roar of a ferocious beast replaced the thunder that resounded in everyone's heart. I saw red flames rolling behind Muchu, and a huge monster with 2 horns on its head and a dragon head and a human body emerged from the sea of fire. The monster had a hideous face, and its body was wrapped in black iron chains. It struggled and roared in the sea of fire. This is the other side of Muchu, the violent soul of the Flame Demon Lord. Before Muchu's consciousness awakened, his zombie-like body had already developed consciousness. Once, Muchu was affected by the violent anger of the flame demon and could only suppress it in the depths of his soul. As the power of his soul continued to increase, this influence was constantly weakened, and the flame demon's soul was imprisoned in Muchu's soul. Now, Muchu has an extremely crazy plan in his heart. Roar! The flame demon's soul was bound by black chains, roaring and screaming in the sea of fire, and his red eyes were full of killing and bloodthirstiness. The next second, Muchu's outstretched arm swung down suddenly, and the flame demon's soul behind him suddenly turned into a long dragon of fire and returned to the flame furnace in front of him. I use my soul to forge the kingship. The moment the flame demon's soul poured into the flame furnace, the flowing fire spread, and an indescribable terrifying aura erupted from the flame furnace. An extremely domineering long sword tore through the raging flames, and with the supreme kingly power that looked down on all races, it appeared out of nowhere and appeared in front of everyone. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 393. A red domineering long sword tore through the sky from the blazing karma fire, and appeared in front of the world with unrivaled supreme power. The fine lines carved on the sword are like dragon scales, and the fiery red sword edge is wrapped with flames. The sword body floats downward in the air, and the faint roar of the dragon can be heard. When the many Yonjai tribesmen on the ground below saw this long sword born from the flames, they all had sincere expressions on their faces and prostrate themselves in worship. Even the remaining Dawn Alliance forces on the battlefield felt the domineering aura coming from the red sword. Deep in my soul, I felt extremely palpitating, and I unconsciously felt the desire to surrender. This breath is. When the nightmare hiding in the darkness saw Wang Jian's birth, his pupils shrank, as if he remembered something. Use the heaven and earth as the furnace, the blazing flames as the fire, control the destiny of the clan, sacrifice the faith of all spirits, attract the souls to forge swords. Could it be that he wants to forcefully break through those shackles? Suddenly, Nightmare seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes showed an unprecedented shock. Stop him quickly, we must not let him pull out that sword. Release soul fluctuations, the voice of Nightmare echoed in the minds of several destruction-level powerhouses in the coalition. After saying this, Nightmare took the lead, brewing majestic evil energy all over his body, and turned into a ball of light and rushed into the sky. The several powerful destructive-level men scattered on the battlefield were all trembling with fear the moment the king's sword was forged. The domineering aura carrying the power of the king made them feel an inexplicable threat. After receiving the news from the Nightmare, several destruction-level beings showed no scruples and used all their strength to rush towards the red-haired figure in the sky. The Yasha twins entwining their souls with evil spirits, the huge blood-armored giant, the red-robed figure who controls the ice, and the holy spear Wang Hung wrapped in golden light. In an instant, 6 destructive levels of energy, including nightmare, exploded, breaking through the heavy siege of the royal family of Yanjai like breaking bamboo. Above the sky, a head of red hair fell down around his waist, but the Lord of Eternal Night, wearing a candle dragon armor, had his eyes closed tightly. The slender hands carried layers of karmic fire, and the whole body was constantly blessed by the invisible power of luck. There was not a trace of ripples visible on the handsome face. All the faith and luck absorbed from the royal family of Yanjai were melted into the domineering longsword in front of him, and the scale-like patterns engraved on the latter's sword became increasingly clear. Not far away, 6 destructive level powerhouses attacked together, and the progressively huge energy shattered the surrounding space inch by inch. But Mu Qiu remained unaware, with bloodshot streaks opening at the corners of her closed eyes. Just when several destructive level experts were about to approach Mu Qiu, a white vortex suddenly appeared in the space in front of them. A figure covered in blood stopped in front of everyone. His shirtless upper body was covered with hideous scars and bright red blood stains. As soon as this white figure appeared, he looked at everyone with cold eyes, and the scars all over his body could not make him take a step back. White Death Ji Yufeng. He grabbed the surrounding void with both hands, and the tiger's mouth cracked. Dark Prison. Lightning-like black cracks suddenly appeared in the surrounding space, releasing powerful suction to suck everyone into the endless dark space. Ji. A strange cry came from under the mysterious light red robe, and his figure suddenly turned into a puddle of ice mist and disappeared. When they gathered together again, the red-robed figure had appeared beside Ji Yufeng. Stretching out his withered grey arms, the cold air condensed, freezing the white god of death in the extreme cold forever. The hurricane roared and lifted the hood of the red robe, revealing a rat face covered with grey hair. Just as the withered arms were grabbing at Ji Yufeng with the sharp cold wind, a piece of petals quietly drifted away. Suddenly, the grey and white rat man's red eyes flashed with horror, and he hurriedly retracted his arm in mid-air. I saw beautiful roses taking root on his withered arms. Green vines covered with spikes are wrapped around the grey-white hair, sucking blood and growing rapidly. With a flash of light in the rat man's eyes, he cut off the right arm that was connected by vines. Ice crystals formed at the cut, and it turned into an ice arm in an instant. He suddenly looked up and saw a shadow of an angel emitting holy light emerging in the sky not far from Ji Yufeng. The angel's face is blurred, his head is lowered, and his hands are folded together to hold a red and white flower. Among the red and white flowers, with the shadows of butterflies hovering deep in the flowers, 2 pretty girls could be vaguely seen facing each other, with their fingers intertwined. Those 2 girls. The Yusha twins looked at the phantom of the holy angel with eyes splitting open. They had just almost died at the hands of the 2 women. Immediately afterwards, a blue mecha with a shell full of cracks flew in the air, and destructive light cannons fired like raindrops. A quicksand giant whose whole body was surrounded by yellow sand punched out with a punch. The powerful power made several people retreat. While several people were still entangled with Ji Yufeng and others, Nightmare avoided the holy light and suddenly raised his head to look into the distance. Not good. At the same time, Mu Qiu, who was standing in the sky in the distance, suddenly opened his eyes. The overlapping blood moon was reflected in the blood-red pupils, and the full moon behind it also cracked in an instant. When the fire of karma burned to the extreme, the domineering longsword in front of him was completely covered with scale-like lines. At this moment, Mu Qiu's eyes were full of domineering power, and he stretched out his hand to grasp the hilt of the king's sword. Boom! Just as he grasped the hilt, thunder suddenly exploded in the dark sky. A series of golden lightnings appeared and disappeared in the night clouds, as if they were giant golden pythons rolling and rolling. A huge vertical eye suddenly opened in the chaotic sky, and it looked down with a look of indifference. Everyone felt a tremor from the depths of their souls the moment they saw this vertical eye. Just as this vertical eye looked at the domineering longsword forged in the furnace of heaven and earth in the sky, a flash of surprise flashed in its arrogant eyes. Immediately afterwards, the vertical eye in the sky actually showed an unprecedented fury. The next moment, an unspeakable powerful energy swept the world in an instant. The chaotic night suddenly set off a storm, and everyone below could clearly feel the furious breath transmitted by the vertical eye. What kind of monster is that thing? The golden vertical eye stood in the sky, and everyone felt like a tiny ant under its gaze. With just one eye, it could make even the strongest of the destruction level feel terrified. Did it appear again? In the distance, the nightmare who was stopped by Ji Yufeng and others flashed his eyes, and looked at Mu Qiu with a solemn look. Even the heavenly Dao has noticed you. Lord of the eternal night, this time, how can you fight against the heavenly Dao? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 394. Just when everyone was increasingly terrified by the vertical eye that suddenly appeared from the night. The golden vertical eye in the sky stared straight at the domineering king's sword in front of Mu Qiu, with an unspoken anger in its eyes. In the next moment, a giant hand with golden light pushed aside the layers of night covering the sky above the Jade Sea and crushed from the depths of the sky. The giant hand was shining with dazzling golden light, as if it contained infinite energy, pressing towards somewhere below. And looking at the direction of its grabbing, it was the Lord of Eternal Night standing in mid-air. What's going on? Countless survivors who watched this amazing battle through the screen had burning eyes and dull expressions. For some reason, they could not see the vertical eye and the golden giant hand that protruded from the sky. But they instinctively felt an inexplicable fear. And the people in the Jade Sea battlefield were completely frozen, looking at the giant hand that covered the sky with horror. Even those as strong as the destruction level dared not move at all, they all felt the oppression brought to them by the one-eyed one. Time seemed to freeze at this moment, and the picture was frozen at the moment when the golden giant hand crushed the red-haired figure. However, just when everyone was in a trance, the Lord of Eternal Night, who was standing on the sky, suddenly moved. As if sensing something, Mu Qiu's expression also froze the moment he saw the golden vertical eye. The most intuitive feeling that the vertical eye gave him was sacred and domineering, indifferent and arrogant. It was like a god who was in touch with the truth and spirit, looking down on the world. More importantly, Mu Qiu felt a trace of breath similar to the domineering king's sword in his hand in the gaze of this vertical eye. As if thinking of something, Mu Qiu's eyes suddenly showed a wild smile. Bloodshot appeared at the corners of his eyes, and veins popped up on his arm holding the hilt of the sword. Accompanied by a burst of wild laughter, he pulled out the domineering red long sword from the void. And the golden giant hand that stretched out from the sky also crushed down at this time. In an instant, a powerful and earth-shaking might spread in the air. The blood-red and golden light covered the dark night, and the whole world was left with only the giant hand holding up the sky and the spreading blood-red edge. Boom! One after another, the dark thunder turned into a black giant python and descended from the night, tearing the space apart, and all bombarded the blood-red edge. The thunder was more like a blow to everyone's heart. After seeing the giant hand crushing and the thunder falling, the fear of the unknown existence surged in their hearts, and their souls trembled and their hearts were terrified. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the rolling thunder gradually subsided, and the golden giant hand that stretched out from the sky and crushed down gradually dissipated. Everyone couldn't help but take a breath of cold air after seeing the scene of the golden light fading away. The land covered by the golden light seemed to be flattened and turned into a plain. Both buildings and creatures were razed to the ground and turned into dust between heaven and earth. With just this one blow, nearly half of the surface of Yuhe was razed to the ground. The smoke and dust dissipated, and a red figure vaguely stood on the land that was cut off. The dark red long hair fluttered in the wind, and the blood-red light flashed on the close-fitting armor, and the broken lines healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was blood flowing on his forehead, but his handsome face still had an evil smile, and he held a red long sword that exuded a domineering aura in his hand. The golden light dissipated, and this figure seemed to have become the only light between heaven and earth in the eyes of everyone. The vertical eye that poked out of the sky was staring at the red-haired figure holding the long sword, as if it wanted to engrave it in its heart. After several breaths, the vertical eye just disappeared into the sky, and there was no life under the cover of the night. You actually really came to this step. In the distance, Nightmare's eyes were focused on Mu-Chiu, who had long dark red hair, and the shock in his eyes was not concealed. On the flat land that turned into a wasteland, the red figure became the focus of everyone's attention. The red long sword in his hand, which was forged with the world as a furnace, appeared with black spells, releasing a palpitating breath. And along the dark red hair, a line of blood flowed out, adding a bit of morbid beauty to his handsome appearance. The Zilong armor he was wearing also showed spiderweb-like cracks, but was quickly repaired. Obviously, the Lord of Eternal Night did not escape unscathed during the battle with the Golden Giant Hand. At this moment, a cry broke the complex mood in everyone's heart. "He is injured, kill him now." The gray-faced dwarf mouse man had fierce eyes and spoke incomprehensible words, and his figure had already rushed out at the first time. It was difficult for him to think too many deep things with his low intelligence. In his opinion, as long as he killed the Lord of Eternal Night, he could become a member of the 12 sacrificial immortals. The dwarf mouse man's figure was extremely fast, frost condensed in his hands, and murderous intent was in his red pupils. He turned into a beam of ice light and flashed to Mu-Chiu's side, and a cold spear condensed with the ghost of the underworld was about to pierce Mu-Chiu's back. The extreme cold air froze the surrounding land and turned it into an ice field. At this moment, Mu-Chiu suddenly turned around, and the red sword in his hand cut through the air, bringing up waves of flames, and an indescribable domineering power pressed down from the sky. The flames surged, and the roar of the flame demon beast could be heard faintly in the whistling sound. The ice spear condensed with the cold air of the underworld was instantly swallowed by the flames. The rat man was terrified at the moment of the king's pressure, and his body could not move at all. In panic, he condensed an ice shield to resist. However, the black spell attached to the long sword instantly eroded the ice shield, and Mu-Chiu's figure appeared behind the rat man in the next second. The domineering sword blade wrapped in the roar of the flame demon broke through the air, and the rat man's body was split into two in an instant. Caw-caw! A crisp sound rang out, and the rat man's severed body was about to turn into ice and shatter. But just as the ice spread to the neck, the part cut off by the domineering king's sword was actually entangled with black spells. As if cursed, or haunted by evil spirits, the rat man's supernatural power could not be used at this moment. Mu-Chiu's evil face had a wild smile on it, and in the horrified eyes of the rat man, he slashed down with another sword. A bloody rat head fell to the ground, and a large piece of blood splashed on the flattened plain. A powerful man of the destruction level actually fell in this way. Looking at the blood drops dripping from the sword blade, Mu-Chiu stepped over the corpse of the powerful man of the destruction level, stood in the air, and his tone was filled with the supreme kingly power that looked down on the world, shocking people's souls. This sword is called Eternal Night Kingship. It is both eternal night and kingship. I cast the kingship with my soul, promote the destiny of the Eternal Night clan, suppress the destiny of all spirits, dominate the territory of the 8 directions, and determine the peace of the 9 states. 8 Wasteland Nightland, all races surrender. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 395. Bawang Yetu, all races surrender. The domineering and powerful words echoed throughout the Jade Sea battlefield, and countless people felt trembling from the bottom of their hearts. The red flames of karma released by Wang Quan's night sword instantly swept across the world. Countless Yanjai tribesmen around them who were born at dawn began to cheer and howl, like a group of demons dancing wildly. The red figure wearing the candle dragon armor stepped out of the flames under the blessing of the night and the fire waves, like a supreme king who emerged from the fire of karma. This is, the Lord of Eternal Night. Under the surveillance of drones, images from the Yuhei battlefield were transmitted to the screens of major human bases. The top leaders of these forces originally wanted to let these survivors see the fall of the Yonjai dynasty with their own eyes, and use the destruction of the Yonjai dynasty to boost the morale of the human race. But I didn't expect that this move would backfire, and the Yonjai dynasty would become a huge stone weighing on the hearts of countless humans. In the streets and alleys of major bases, countless survivors stared blankly at the glaring red-haired figure in the picture, feeling fear and shock from the bottom of their hearts. On the top of the mountain to the north of Jade Sea, Yefanyan stared at the red figure swept by the red flames in the distance. There is a bit of domineering in his evil face, as if nothing in the world can be taken seriously by him. Small, miss. It's too dangerous here, let's go back as soon as possible. Uncle Fu behind him urged anxiously, the power of the Yonjai dynasty has exceeded his imagination. He must report everything that happened here to the base city lord in order to make early plans. Yefanyan frowned slightly and subconsciously clenched the dark green jade pendant around her neck that was still radiating light. She witnessed with her own eyes, the birth of the Evernight royal family. Perhaps in the eyes of others, the Evernight royal family is just a new race that is different from zombies and humans. But Yefanyan, who comes from 1,000 years later, remembers deeply that this race will become the supreme royal family above all spirits in the future. The status of the human race will gradually decline under the oppression of the Eternal Night royal family, and the source of all disasters is the god who only exists in legends. Lord of Eternal Night. Feel the Supreme King's power coming towards you, this powerful wave that makes your heart tremble. A complicated look appeared in Yefanyan's eyes, and she pursed her dry lips unconsciously. Is such a frighteningly powerful existence really something she can fight against? She could not forget the mission entrusted to her by her race, nor could she forget that night, the crazy killing of the Eternal Night royal family, and the deep despair that the human race fell into. Yefanyan stood under the night, on the top of the Jade Sea, as if there were pairs of invisible hands pushing towards her behind her. The gears of fate are turning again at this moment. Going back in time, different choices will affect the outcome of countless living beings. And in the battlefield of Jade Sea, those who witnessed the scene of the Lord of Eternal Night forging a sword with his soul and fighting alone in the sky were frightened to the point where their soldiers lost their morale and even lost their souls. Monsters, these are monsters. Retreat, retreat. Run quickly, are these monsters really something humans can deal with? After seeing the situation clearly, some human coalition forces began to flee in all directions, and the already disintegrated team was instantly shattered. The scattered human coalition forces began to flee in all directions of the battlefield, their faces frightened and their hearts filled with fear. These coalition forces are all survivor bases from various major human beings. Most of them are just ordinary people with mediocre strength. They were temporarily deployed to the battlefield to encircle and suppress the Yonjai dynasty. However, their current goal is to escape from Yuhei base. At the same time, the Eternal Night royal family scattered throughout the battlefield also opened their red eyes at this moment. Their red pupils are filled with incomparable madness and bloodthirsty. With their evil nature, they have an innate desire for blood and souls. In other words, their loyalty and worship will only be dedicated to the Creator who created them. Countless Yonjai tribesmen let out frightening screams, and used the most primitive method to attack and kill the fleeing human coalition forces in the dark. With sharp claws and sharp teeth, the monster-like Yonjai tribesmen use their bodies' most primitive instincts to tear apart the enemies in front of them. Blurred flesh and blood, mutilated limbs, and the disgusting smell of blood filled the night. In just a few moments, most of the large human coalition forces that lost their command were killed by the Yonjai tribe. What a monster, the Lord of Eternal Night! In the distance, the twin Yusha twins looked at the unparalleled and domineering figure, their faces distorted. The two identical faces showed expressions of mourning and madness at the same time. Immediately afterwards, two slender figures moved at the same time, which shocked the remaining coalition forces present. The two of them looked at each other, their bodies turned into dozens of red and blue after images, and then they turned around and fled towards the distant horizon. This made some of the awakened people around who were ready to fight bravely look dumbfounded. Two destructive level experts, running away without even saying hello. Dozens of clone after images were running through the air at high speeds, trying to escape from the Jade Sea in an instant. However, at this moment, the space at the edge of the Jade Sea suddenly cracked with large black cracks. Countless black space cracks continuously left spiderweb-like traces, sealing off the surrounding sky in an instant. Ji Yufeng, whose body was already riddled with holes, appeared in the air, his hands pulled out space cracks like black lightning, and his knuckles were cut with large blood stains. Just when the dozens of clones transformed by the ghost evil twins were trapped, the holy light mixed with beautiful petals scattered, and a phantom of an angel holding flowers appeared in front of him. Just when the ghost evil twins and Ji Yufeng and others were fighting fiercely, a roar suddenly came from not far away. Roar! The huge blood armor giant roared and rushed straight towards the red-haired figure in the distance. The figure tens of meters high ran wildly on the ground, the earth trembled, and a large number of Yanjai people were crushed by its huge body, leaving no bones. Looking at the blood armor giant running towards him, the rich blood rushed straight into the sky. A gleam of brilliance flashed in Mu Chiu's eyes, and he stood in the air. The fierce roar of the beast could be heard from the king's night sword in his hand, and the dark lines on the sword were moving. Just as the blood armor giant was about to hit his body, Mu Chiu swung the red sword suddenly. A domineering energy wave came from the king's sword, and the ferocious blood armor giant was shocked by this domineering power. It was during this stagnation that the sharp sword edge mixed with flames turned into a blood-colored arc and broke through the air. Accompanied by the blood armor giant's howl, its entire thigh had been cut off by its roots. Not only that, lines of ink-colored spells spread along the broken wound like snakes, and in an instant they covered the blood armor giant's body. The blood armor giant immediately let out a painful wail, and his hands scratched the black spells on his face unconsciously. He felt that the blood in his body was actually sucked away and swallowed by these extremely weird black spells. The body that could have been restored also rotted and fell off under the erosion of the black spell, and the blood rising from the top of the head seemed to burn its life. The next second, Mu Chiu, wearing the Zilong armor, turned into a bloodlight and appeared at the back of the blood armor giant's neck. A flash of flame arc flashed by, and the back of the giant's neck was cut off immediately, and the huge body fell to the ground, and the earth trembled. Large pieces of blood and flesh splattered, and the ground under the feet was splashed with hot blood and flesh, and pits were formed one by one. The huge blood armor giant was eroded by the eternal night spell and was beheaded by the king's night sword. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 396. The huge giant fell, and the boiling blood dyed the ground red. Mu Chiu, wearing the candle dragon armor, stepped on the bloody ground and slowly walked towards the center of the battlefield. However, at this moment, a gust of wind roared behind him, and a beam of golden light turned into lightning and struck Mu Chiu directly in the heart. Mu Chiu seemed to feel something, and turned around suddenly, waving the royal night sword in her hand, and immediately blocked the golden spear that was speeding towards him. An evil smile appeared on his handsome face, but a look of horror flashed in the eyes of Wang Hung in front of him. He only felt a huge force coming from the gun, and the oncoming Supreme King's power weakened his strength. The black incantation on the Red King's sword snakes onto the gun body as if it is alive. The sacred golden light that originally appeared on the gun gradually dimmed. Wang Hung looked horrified, and before the spell could spread to his body, he jumped back with the help of the huge force from Wang's sword. After retreating several hundred meters, 2 deep ravines appeared on the ground. Only then did Wang Heng stumble and stabilize his body. Looking at the Lord of Eternal Night walking toward him, there was a hint of mockery in his handsome face. Wang Heng frowned, a look of determination appeared in his eyes, veins popped out on the hand holding the spear, and golden light suddenly appeared on the gun. Inherited from heaven, all evil will be eradicated. Fan appears. A golden light from deep in the sky pierced the night and shot directly into Wang Heng's body. In the next moment, Wang Heng's figure surged out, holding a long spear that shot through the air and turned into a stream of golden light. Above the golden light, a huge ferocious beast resembling a liger appeared. It was full of righteousness and its eyes were full of ferocious light, roaring and charging towards Mu Qiu. There is actually a trace of divine beast blood in the body, no wonder it can trigger the candle dragon induction. The corner of Mu Qiu's mouth rose. Wang Heng's superpower could actually impart his own blood into the weapon. The dragon gave birth to 9 sons, among which Bian is a righteous beast that is full of righteousness and can eliminate evil. No wonder that golden gun can drive away evil spirits and has a strong restraint effect on evil spirits. But what really surprised Mu Qiu was the golden light emanating from the body of the liger-like beast. It is exactly the same as the giant golden hands stretching out from the sky. Does even God want to help you get rid of me? But, you want to fight against me with just a trace of the blood of a divine beast. Mu Qiu's eyes flashed, and the royal night sword floated in the air. Roar! Under the intertwining of crimson flames and blood light, an extremely huge dragon appeared out of the sky. What he devoured was the real ancient beast. Candle Dragon. As soon as the Candle Dragon came out, the night covering the entire sky became darker, and even the surrounding air became extremely hot. The Candle Dragon, covered with hot karma fire, roared and collided with the dragon transformed by Wang Heng. There was a loud bang, and the blood-red light swallowed up the golden light in an instant. The lion-tiger-like beast was instantly shattered by the attack of Zilong's huge body empowered by Wang Wei. Even the golden light after being crushed was instantly swallowed up by the blood and completely eliminated. After all, what Wang Heng holds is only a trace of the blood of the divine beast, which is not enough to fight against the candle dragon flame soul blessed by Wang Wei. At the moment when Baiwen's shadow shattered, Wang Heng's broken body fell down, his cloth armor shattered and his body covered with scars. The famous holy spear struggled to stand up, but he couldn't muster the slightest strength under the pressure of the overbearing king. The golden holy spear in his hand broke into 2 pieces with a click. He stared at Mu Qiu's smiling face, and then looked up at the sky covered by the night. As if he had thought of something, he spit out a large amount of blood from his mouth, showed a miserable smile, and fell to the ground dead. And just in the distant sky, dozens of clones transformed by the Yasha twins were also besieged and solved by Ji Yufeng and others. Thorns and vines spread in the sky, connected in series with strange red and blue bodies to absorb nutrients. Bright blood-red roses are blooming one after another, like a sea of flowers. Looking away from Wang Heng's broken body, Mu Qiu stared at a dark place in the battlefield. In the void that Mu Qiu was looking at, a nightmare figure wearing a black robe and a white mask emerged. He stared straight at the royal night sword in Mu Qiu's hand, and then looked at Mu Qiu's handsome face. A look of horror that has not faded appeared in the pupils under the mask. Based on royal power and using the faith of all spirits to forge swords, the Lord of Eternal Night is really a good trick. I didn't expect that. I really let you open the shackles, and with the blessing of that sword, you broke through to the realm of Daowen. Mu Qiu's eyes flashed, and she looked at Nightmare without hesitation. Only a few sentences, but a lot of information has been revealed. Break through the extreme realm of mortals, move mountains and fill seas, create worlds and return to the source, and become a supreme existence like a god. The realm above the destruction level is the source of truth. And since Nightmare can tell the level of the source, it proves that Mu will not be the first being to break through the destruction level. Even in the heterogeneous religion, there may also be other principle-level powerhouses. You first used your own power to defy the way of heaven and create a clan, and then you used your royal power to enter the way to forge the divine sword. Using mortal power to attempt to override the destiny of heaven will definitely not be tolerated by the law of heaven. Nightmare looked at Mu with a deep look, as if giving an ultimatum. You have repeatedly destroyed the plans of the Holy Church, and this time you have angered the heavenly Deo, which is intolerable to the fate of heaven. Your fate is over and you will surely die. After saying this, the figure of Nightmare began to fade gradually. The old fox had already transferred his body the moment the king's night sword was cast, leaving only a remnant soul. Looking directly at Mu's face, he wanted to see a trace of fear and uneasiness on the latter's face. But what he didn't expect was that Mu's evil face actually showed a wild smile. Fate of heaven. In my life, the most fearful thing is fate of heaven. The Megatama rotated in the blood-red pupils, and the power of the pupil technique was exerted to the extreme between the overlapping blood moons. The oracle returns to the ruins. In an instant, the ground under the feet of the crowd began to shake wildly, rubble flew, and smoke and dust rose. The powerful soul energy turned into substance and swept across the battlefield. The collapsed land that was originally crushed by the golden giant hand instantly turned into a dark wasteland, with black air entangled. With a loud bang, the wasteland cracked, and a huge demon palace emerged from the abyss of the earth. A domineering and ferocious skeleton throne floated up, and a blood-red figure wearing a candle dragon armor slowly sat down, with unparalleled power. He suddenly inserted the king's night sword in his hand into the endless void in front of him. Mu, leaning on the throne, grinned and laughed, with unruly and wild meaning in his laughter. All kinds of evil thoughts, stepping half an inch into the land of eternal night, I will cut them off with one sword. 8 Wasteland Nightland, my master rises and falls. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 397. As the Dawn Alliance consisting of 6 human bases was wiped out in one fell swoop, all human bases also received the news immediately. This is an unprecedented battle, and there are more than 10 destruction-level experts participating in it. After the battle, tens of thousands of human coalition forces were directly buried in the territory of the Yonjai dynasty. And many high-level human beings also have different attitudes towards the outcome of defeat. There's shock, there's anger, there's panic. The entire fierce battle was watched by their eyes through drone equipment. In addition to the powerful strength of the Lord of Eternal Night, there is another thing that worries countless humans. Under the witness of millions of human beings, a new race even more terrifying than zombies came into the world. The royal family of Eternal Night. Born in redemption, rising in the dawn, the Eternal Night dynasty has completely entered the sight of all races. For a time, all human bases and the survivors who watched the Battle of Dawn became worried. These monsters with gray skin and red pupils are not only powerful, but also have the ability to think independently like humans, and their self-healing ability is even more extraordinary. It is simply a perfect blend of humans and zombies. The Eternal Night dynasty quickly became a hot topic of debate among major human bases, and all parties held emergency meetings. How to treat the former has become the issue of greatest concern to all parties. But there is no doubt that the sudden appearance of the Eternal Night royal family has made the already dark apocalypse even more chaotic. In a high-rise villa in a human base, a middle-aged man in a suit held an old newspaper in his hand and listened to Forbes' report next to him. The old man dressed as a butler told the middle-aged man everything he saw and heard on the top of Uhe Mountain, and then stood aside and waited. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, then slowly stood up and looked out the window. Towering buildings were surrounded by clouds and mist, cutting off the horrific apocalypse from the outside world. Eternal Night Dynasty. The middle-aged man suddenly smiled bitterly and sighed. In so many years since the end of the world, you are the first person who dares to call himself king. There was a bit of solemnity in his deep eyes. The situation in the last days has become increasingly chaotic, and even I, the city of clouds, cannot survive alone. The middle-aged man suddenly turned around and looked at the old man behind him. Where did that girl Fanyan go? Butler Fubo replied. Miss, not long after she returned to Cloud City, she quickly joined the next batch of trial teams, saying she wanted to improve her strength as soon as possible. The middle-aged man nodded. His daughter seemed to be a different person since she came back from that serious injury. Not only her temperament had changed greatly, but her strength was completely different from before. The middle-aged man even suspected that his daughter was possessed by evil spirits and asked someone to do a soul test in private. But the conclusion he reached was that his daughter was fine except for her weak soul. Yefanyan's working hard to improve has reduced the number of rumors in the base, and also made the middle-aged man worry less. After thinking for a while, the middle-aged man ordered. Send someone to pay close attention to the clues of the Yonjai dynasty, and at the same time contact the leaders of other human bases in the North Sky region. It is necessary for us to have a meeting. It's really scary, the Lord of Eternal Night. In a dark basement of a certain base, a masked clown with oil paint all over his body laughed sinisterly. I didn't expect that. I actually opened the shackles set by the way of heaven and entered the way with royal power. Why didn't I think of it? As the sinister laughter grew louder, the basement door was suddenly opened. Light came in from outside the door, and Zhou Xiang walked out from under the stairs with a gloomy look. He looked at the masked clown and said in a vain voice, Sir, the forces of the Evernight dynasty have begun their counterattack. Several bases participating in Operation Dawn have been killed. This base is no longer safe. The masked clown was slightly startled when he heard Zhou Xiang's words, and then smiled even more unscrupulously. Oh? Really? It seems we should retreat first. Then the other people in the base, oh no, it's better to kill them all, he. He suddenly turned his head and looked into the dark corner. The clown's smile actually looked a bit ferocious in the gloomy basement. Then, thank you for taking care of me during this period, the leader of Wangcheng base. Looking in the direction of the clown mask, I saw the corpse of a middle-aged man with wide eyes leaning against him in the corner of the basement. This man's face was dull and his eyes were dull, but he was neatly dressed, like a puppet on strings. A huge bloody hole appeared on the man's back. All the organs and internal organs inside were hollowed out, and the shriveled back was filled with blood. The soul is removed, leaving only an emotionless, manipulated body. You dare to openly defy God's will. How long can you survive when God's eyes are on you? I hope you can survive the next time we meet. After all, those old guys have already made up their minds to get rid of you. I really want to make you into a new toy, he. In a quiet city ruin, only a few low roars of zombies can be heard occasionally. The dark streets are covered with mottled bloodstains, and the long abandoned vehicles on both sides have turned dark gray, and traces of rust corrosion are everywhere. This is a city ruin occupied by zombies. Zombies wander around the streets and alleys, and their white pupils are full of desire for blood. Most of the energy in these zombies has been consumed, and they rely on biological instincts to find food. When food is extremely scarce, they will even choose to attack their companions around them and devour the remaining energy essence in their flesh and blood. At this moment, a large black shadow suddenly shrouded the land at the end of the city. The shadow began to spread from the distant horizon to the city, and countless abandoned buildings became extremely dark under the erosion of the shadow. Then, the entire ground began to shake wildly. In the distance, deep in the earth covered by the shadow, Eternal Night Clan with red eyes and dark skin blending into the darkness rushed towards the depths of the city. These Eternal Night Clan members have different shapes, some of them look the same as ordinary people, and some have turned into violent and ferocious monsters. They let out strange roars, but the evil and murderous intent in their eyes were unmistakable. The surrounding zombies immediately attacked these Eternal Night clan members, and they were also aroused by their hunger. However, what people didn't expect was that these usually brutal and ferocious human enemies were not the opponents of these Eternal Night clan members born in the shadow. The zombie tide gathered in the city was quickly dispersed by the surging Eternal Night army, and countless zombies were trapped in the situation of being surrounded and killed by the Eternal Night clan members. Roar. A zombie bared its fangs at a human-like member of the Eternal Night tribe, and tore a large piece of flesh from the latter's shoulder. Black blood gushed out immediately, but the human-like Eternal Night Master's face did not show any pain. On the contrary, he grinned, and bloodthirsty murderous intent flashed in his blood-red eyes. He actually opened his mouth wide and bit the zombie in front of him with his sharp teeth. The zombie's rotten half-face was torn off in an instant, and blood splattered. Roar. The zombie let out a painful roar. If it had consciousness, its face would definitely show a look of fear. In their instinctive memory, these humans should be the food they hunt. In a moment, the zombie was killed by the Eternal Night tribe and fell to the ground. The latter's torn shoulder healed rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. The muscular Eternal Night man opened his bloody mouth and turned his attention to the other zombies around him. There was no sign of being infected by the corpse poison. The Eternal Night royal family was born in the endless darkness, and their bodies have natural immunity to toxins. Amid the screams and roars of the zombies, the ruins of the city turned into a slaughterhouse dedicated to hunting zombie heretics. The dirty blood spread in the city, and the evil laughter of the Eternal Night royal family began to echo over the entire city. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 398. A human base hundreds of meters away from Yuhei is surrounded by a wall similar to the ancient city wall made of bricks and iron sheets. However, on the current city wall, there are rows of human soldiers ready to go. Rocket launchers are placed on the edge of the city wall, ready to go. These soldiers are armed with live ammunition, or carry heavy guns on their shoulders, or hold swords. Everyone's face is solemn, and there is an lingering haze in their eyes. They know clearly that even if they are facing something. Come, those monsters appear. A soldier exclaimed tremblingly, pointing in a direction and trembling uncontrollably. I saw a large black shadow on the ground at the far end of the city wall spreading towards the base like a wave. Followed by the sound of the iron cavalry stomping on the ground. The sound seemed to step on the hearts of everyone, and the shock was accompanied by boundless fear. Here they come. Everyone looked intently, and saw a group of skeleton war horses rushing on the horizon in the distance, with black figures with burly bodies and red eyes sitting on their backs. These skeleton war horses were wrapped in black air, and their empty eye sockets were filled with black flames. They stepped on the dark clouds and were very powerful. For details of their origins, please see chapter 205. And sitting on the backs of these skeleton war horses were the powerful creatures that made these humans extremely afraid. The Eternal Night royal family. As the black shadows behind the skeleton war horses swept to the foot of the city wall, countless Eternal Night people stood aside one by one, and a white figure emerged from the darkness. This man was wearing a white suit and white hair. His expression was extremely cold, and the breath of strangers kept away came to his face. Just below the man, there was also a skeleton warhorse riding, but this warhorse was all dark white, and the power of space surrounded its eye sockets, and it was very handsome. Yes, it's the White Death. Is that demon here too? The army was approaching, and the soldiers in the city were horrified when they saw Ji Yufeng, with a strong look of fear in their eyes. On the city wall, a figure leaped into the air, a pair of bird-like wings spread out, releasing an extraordinary and powerful pressure. This is a destructive level strongman. The lower body of this man is no different from that of an ordinary human, but the upper half of his body above the waist and abdomen is revealed to be a bird and beast. The bird-beast man flew into the air, looked at the Eternal Night Army in the distance with a solemn expression, and shouted to Ji Yufeng. White Death, what is your intention in leading the army here? Ji Yufeng's cold face showed no expression at all. He looked up at the base wall in front of him and raised a token in his hand. The palm-sized token was made of black iron, and a blood-eyed single eye was engraved on the top, with black flames entwined on it, which was extraordinary. In the center of the token, there is a word Xiao. When the bird-beast man saw the token, a look of horror flashed across his face. Xiao Wang order. Some recent intelligence rumors made him recognize the black flame token in front of him at a glance. It represents the highest status of the Eternal Night dynasty, above the royal family, except for the Supreme Lord of the Eternal Night. Submission, or death. Without any extra nonsense, Ji Yufeng's eyes were stern and his tone was cold. The bird-beast man was slightly shocked and said in a tough tone. You led your troops to capture several human bases in succession and slaughtered countless people. Do you really think that the Eternal Night dynasty is invincible? Even if the human race in the entire Dongxiao domain is declining, don't forget that there are countless geniuses of our human race in other domains. Why should we be afraid of your Eternal Night dynasty? The bird-beast man was very powerful, and the human soldiers on the wall behind him were also ready to go. Seeing this, Ji Yufeng's lens flashed, and he uttered only one word. Kill. The red pupils of the many Eternal Night tribe members behind him were filled with murderous intent, and their faces also showed evil smiles. Kill. Instantly, countless skeleton war horses sensed the fierce murderous intent on their backs, and they neighed long, surrounded by dark clouds as their iron hooves stomped heavily, and ran wildly towards the distant city wall. Fierce artillery fire also began to blast from the city wall, and countless humans rushed out of the city gate, shouting in encouragement. Instantly, a war was about to break out. The screams of humans and the evil shouts of the Eternal Night tribe members echoed over the city. The main combat power of this base was lost in the dawn battle to encircle Yuhai. The remaining remnants of the defeated army will naturally not be the opponent of these Eternal Night royal families. In a short moment, the solid city wall was shattered by the iron hooves of the skeleton war horses, and the remains of countless soldiers fell around the city wall. Ji Yufeng, wearing a white suit stained with blood, stared at the human battlefield below with an indifferent look on his face. The iron hooves of the skeleton war horses trampled on the streets of major human bases. The red-eyed Eternal Night royal family laughed wildly and evilly on their war horses, like unparalleled iron cavalry stepping out of the underworld of hell. Many years later, this cavalry team riding on skeleton war horses and with extraordinary power became an unforgettable nightmare in the hearts of countless people. People called this army, which was ordered by the Lord of Eternal Night, led by the white god of death, and stepped on the dark clouds. The 18 Riders of the Dark Clouds. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 399. In a quiet jungle hundreds of kilometers away from the ruins of the city. The sound of a cannon completely broke the original tranquility of the jungle. Countless birds fled in all directions amid the chaotic gunfire, and fallen leaves and branches were scattered at the feet of tall trees. From the depths of the jungle, the fierce roar of some kind of beast could be faintly heard, which made people change their minds. However, in this tall jungle surrounded by mutated plants, a huge human base vaguely stands. The wall on the surface of the city is made up of thick vine branches, and the intertwined vines have become the strongest shield for this human base. The base is dotted with all kinds of tall plants that have mutated to become gigantic, and people build houses inside these tall plants. The blooming flowers are obvious on both sides of the road, and the permeating floral fragrance spreads throughout the base, refreshing. However, such a base that seemed to be secluded in the mountains and forests, isolated from the world, actually broke out in an unprecedented fierce battle today. No, it is not so much a battle as a unilateral suppression and killing. The flowers blooming on the roadside are splashed with bright red blood, just like the flowers blooming in the underworld. Countless human soldiers in standard uniforms fled deep into the jungle, their bodies covered in rich blood, and they retreated in fear. What's more, some of the powerful awakened people's eyes were full of fear, and they fled in a certain direction with panic. Zombie, zombie, those zombies rushed in. Run quickly, those demons are not something humans can fight against. More and more survivors in the city join the fleeing team with the awakened ones. In the opposite direction to them, the roar of some kind of monster shook the earth. The diffuse wild sand gradually spread to the entire base covered by plants, and the roars of monsters and howls of humans came one after another. Quick, run, the base gate has been breached, there are zombies outside. A man suddenly opened the door under the tree hole and shouted to his companions inside. However, before he could finish his words, a bloody hole suddenly opened in his chest. Bright red blood spurted out from his chest like a fountain, and large stains of blood soaked out of the corners of the man's mouth. Well. A cold aura surrounded the surroundings, and the breath like coming from the underworld spread to the neck. The man trembled and twisted his head to look behind him, but what he saw was a cracked and terrifying face. It's a zombie. The tall monster with a hideous face behind him, as wizened as a zombie, grinned widely. And the man's plump body shriveled up at a speed visible to the naked eye, turning into a mummy, www. Licking the mottled blood on his sharp claws, he threw the mummy in front of him to the side. The zombies turned to target the awakened ones fleeing in the dense forest in the distance. The yellow sand filled the sky, and a huge zombie army swept across the entire human base like locusts passing through. A zombie man wearing bronze armor, with cracked skin and a resolute face is walking in a jungle spread by wild sand, surrounded by a large number of zombie monsters with red eyes. Looking at the panic-stricken humans in front of him, Zhang Yuan held up the token wrapped in ghost fire in his hand. The lord of Wanhua city is dead, but those who give up resistance and join the Yanjai dynasty will live. There were very few responders around. They regarded the zombie army led by Zhang Yuan as snake-scorpion monsters and were afraid to avoid them. Shaking his head slowly, Zhang Yuan put away the Yaol King's order in his hand and waved to the zombie army behind him. As these zombie monsters that retained their sanity opened their red eyes and opened their sharp fangs, a killing spree exclusive to the zombie clan began. After a while, the screams and cries in the jungle base gradually subsided, and only the low moans belonging to the zombie monsters could be heard. Zhang Yuan stood on the open ground, his bronze armor soaked in blood. He took out a list and silently deleted the name Wanhua base from it. Kakik. At the same time, in another human base a few cities away from the city of 10,000 flowers. The flames of war were raging, and the boiling sea of fire was raging in every corner of the base. The strong smell of blood is nauseating, and the permeating flames are burning wantonly on the dilapidated buildings. On the central street of the city, a figure with blood-stained bandages all over his body stood quietly. The blood under his body has flowed into a river, and there are corpses everywhere under his feet. Broken corpses and scattered organs can be seen everywhere. The bright red blood seemed to have covered this slender figure with a veil, and the blood seemed to be the only color in the entire city. There were cheers and applause from countless Yanjai tribesmen all around, and their eyes were full of hysterical bloodthirsty. Compared with other teams courtesy first and then soldiers, these Yanjai tribesmen prefer to follow the killing-loving adult in front of them. Everything they passed was bloody, and the bloodthirst and brutality of killing were the desires engraved in their instincts. The mixture of fire and blood, and the loud shouts of countless eternal night royals in the city, together painted a picture that was like a hell sacrifice. Kakik. The woman's laughter echoed in the empty street, and her one eye was filled with a sick, bloodthirsty smile. On the slender waist of the bandaged figure, there was a ghost fire token hanging, and the blood splattered on it was as red as flames. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 400. Just as the outside world was still discussing the rise of the Eternal Night royal family after the Dawn War, a more shocking news came to the site of major bases. The Eternal Night dynasty emerged as a new force and broke through dozens of city bases including the Dawn Alliance in one fell swoop. Whether it was the urban ruins occupied by zombies or the shelter bases built by the human race, it was difficult to escape the clutches of the Eternal Night army. They all fell and belonged to the territory of the Eternal Night dynasty. In detail, the territory of the Eternal Night dynasty has covered more than 20 large and small cities, including large bases such as the Zilan base, becoming the undisputed overlord of the entire Dongxiao domain. Looking at the whole world, there are only a handful of human bases with such vast territories and extraordinary power as the Eternal Night dynasty. Some people were indignant and scolded the Eternal Night dynasty for becoming a major concern for the human race under the rule of the Corpse King. The entire human race should unite to eradicate this kingdom established by the Corpse King. Some people are also worried that the powerful Eternal Night royal family will gradually replace the status of humans in this world. Gradually, people call this emerging race born from the Lord of Eternal Night. Eternal Night Evil Clan. Although the voices from the outside world are different, there is no doubt that the Eternal Night dynasty has become the fear and nightmare in the hearts of countless people. Located in the old site of the Yuhei base in Dongxiao domain, the original Yuhei base has become dilapidated under the artillery fire of the Dawn Alliance. Later, the shocking battle between the Lord of Eternal Night and the Giant Hand turned half of the Yuhei into ruins. After the war, the Yuhei was caught in a tight repair phase. The remaining survivors in the base all became the helpers of this repair phase. On the plain that turned into wasteland, with the joint work of the Eternal Night royal family and many human survivors, buildings with strong alien colors rose from the ground. If you are familiar with it, you can see that the style and characteristics of these buildings are very similar to the game world God's Domain continent. The sole origins of these Eternal Night royals are extracted from the game players who participated in the God's Domain continent, and they subconsciously retain some sensory aesthetics similar to those players. In the central area of the Yuhei base, there are still a few high-rise buildings that have not been affected by the battle. In one of the high-rise offices, Mu Qiu, wearing a thin white shirt, stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling window. Holding a cup of freshly ground coffee, with a smile on his face, his eyes narrowed, looking at the strange weird buildings in the distance. It seems that it will really become a demon world now, Mu Qiu said with a teasing tone. Mu Qiu gave great tolerance to this race that he created with his own hands. At this moment, a crisp knock on the door sounded behind him. Immediately, a beautiful figure pushed open the door and walked in. It was Xiao Hanyan who was in charge of the entire Yuhei situation. Until then, Mu Qiu slowly turned around, with a smile on his face. Xiao Hanyan walked into the room, holding a document report in her hand, looked at Mu Qiu and said, "Professor Zhou's test report on the Yanjai people has come out." Oh. Hearing this, Mu Qiu became interested. For the time being, only the Yanjai people in human form have been tested, and the experimental results have shocked Professor Zhou. According to the test report, each individual of these Yanjai people has supernatural powers. Xiao Hanyan looked at the smiling man in white in front of her with a complicated look. Until now, she didn't know what power Mu Qiu used to create this incredible new race. Rather than saying it's a superpower, it's better to say it's a special racial talent. These Eternal Night people have different individual strengths since their birth. Most of them are only good at strength and speed, while some have awakened powerful superpowers like the Awakened Ones. These Eternal Night people not only have extremely strong self-healing abilities in their physique, but also have immunity to a variety of toxins including corpse poison. In addition to their intelligence being no less than that of ordinary humans, the Eternal Night People's abilities in all aspects far exceed previous expectations. After learning the test results, Professor Joe even excitedly called it the closest race to perfection. Perfect race. Miu lowered his head and took a sip of coffee, smiling without saying a word. Only Miu, the creator, knew that after becoming a substance, the Eternal Night People had increased their strength while also adding a lot of constraints. The most important point is that the evolved Eternal Night People have lost the shadow escape ability of the Black Shadow Core. If they can awaken special superpowers while retaining the shadow escape ability, then the Eternal Night Royal family can be called a truly perfect race. Xiao Hanyan told Miu some details of the test, so he didn't delve into it. Xiao Hanyan continued, most of the human bases on the list have been destroyed, including the 6 major bases of the Dawn Plan. Have the forces of those destruction-level forces been confirmed? Miu's eyes flickered. As long as they participated in the campaign to encircle and suppress the Eternal Night Dynasty, no matter how big or small the force was, he would crush them to ashes. The Shengtian base where the Holy Spear is located, the Twin Demon Garden formed by the Ghost Demon Twins, the Wanhua City of the Lord of 10,000 Flowers, and the Xingmeng base and Linsu that participated in the Dawn battle have all been completely captured, but... As she spoke, Xiao Hanyan's eyes suddenly became a little strange. When our army arrived at the Wangcheng base where the Blood Armor Giant was located, we found that the entire base was massacred by an unknown force. Tens of thousands of people in the city were not spared, all died on the streets, the bodies were broken and covered with teeth marks, and even the blood was strangely absorbed. Someone used the blood of these dead humans to draw a pattern of a blood-colored eye on the ground. Xiao Hanyan looked at Miu. In the Dawn battle, everyone knew that the blood-colored eye was the representative of the Lord of Eternal Night. Obviously, someone wanted to put the blood debt of nearly 100,000 people on the head of the Eternal Night Dynasty. Wangcheng Base. When Xiao Hanyan finished speaking, Miu already had the answer in his heart. The only one who could do such a feat as slaughtering a city and then put the blame on himself was the alien sect that hated him to the core. Xiao Hanyan continued, there is also the mysterious rat man who controls the ice power. We have not found any information about him in the existing information. Her clear eyes looked at Miu and said solemnly. We suspect that he is very likely a destructive heretic from the southern border. The southern border is located in the extreme south. Before the end of the world, there were flocks of birds and beasts there. The terrain was remote. After the end of the world, it became an absolute forbidden area where no one is allowed to approach. Xiao Hanyan was afraid that Miu would go to the southern border again on impulse, so she quickly persuaded him. As if she was afraid that Miu would have some ideas, Xiao Hanyan continued. The southern border has long become the nest of various mutant beasts. I don't know how powerful existence is hidden in it. If you have any ideas about the southern border, you must make plans first and act cautiously. Miu smiled slightly, without saying much, just nodded to show his understanding. He also entrusted Xiao Hanyan with some matters concerning the Eternal Night Dynasty, and the latter left. Miu was very confident in the management ability of this Ice Queen who once ruled the Jade Sea. After Xiao Hanyan left, Miu turned and looked at the distant sky outside the window. The blue sky made people feel relaxed and happy. I remember that the original goal was to be a salted fish. How did he become the master of a domain inexplicably? It doesn't matter, since the world cannot accept a corpse king. Miu's eyes flashed, and he looked at the vast sky in the distance. Then I will change the world into what I want.